And at a glance there, I see he had service in Africa and Pacific.
A good double. And from our second 43rd, Joe Scadden passed away earlier this year. And more families getting involved as the veteran community dwindles from those particular campaigns, but they're determined to continue to see banners flowing. And see the 48th Battalion one there. That was representing the original 48th. Jim Woods was the VC recipient for the 48th. And the second 48th was the most highly decorated battalion in World War II, with 4 Victoria Crosses, 2 going to Western Australians. It was a South Australian, Western Australian unit. And 2 to Percy Gratwick, and also to Stan Gurney, part of the Australian 9th Division, who saw service at the Defence of Tobruk and El Alamein, and then into New Guinea. The 2nd, 3rd Machine Gunners, they fought in Syria and were unfortunate enough to be on a convoy coming back to Australia when their ship was diverted to Sumatra, then to Java to fight the Japanese, while the rest of the convoy continued home. And within a matter of weeks, tragically, the 2nd, 3rd, after fine service in Syria, were prisoners of the Japanese and went through that nightmare. 2nd, 4th Machine Guns, they were also part of the 8th Australian Division up in Singapore. Were only up there for a few weeks before they were captured and lost to us during that prisoner of war experience. An outstanding unit who fought extremely well with their machine guns on Singapore during the battle for Singapore. And we must remember there was a battle for Singapore. People didn't put their hands up. Australians particularly, and also the British and Empire troops fought very hard in Singapore. 13th Brigade, this is the 13th Brigade AIF group. These were initially the militia people, the 16th Battalion, 11th, 28th and 44th. Not to be confused with the 2nd 16th or 2nd 11th. But they eventually were part of the 5th Division and ended up fighting and serving up in New Britain. And 16th gained the only battle honour to a militia unit at Waitabolo. Sadly, John Keith and Bill Martin passed away from that unit. Barbara White's on parade, remembering her family, the Stewart and Nesbitt families, the 11th and 43rd and 51st Battalions, and her son Sean will join her this year.
The oldest all-girls school pipe band in the nation, the Presbyterian Ladies College Pipes and Drums. Pipe Major Tisha Martin and the school banner there, Pipe Sergeant Sarah White.
So here are the Royal Australia Regiment Association and all the banners for the various Royal Australia regiments.
And here we have the 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, the first fellows into Vietnam, serving alongside the US 173rd Airborne, and they're very, very proud of that, having that privilege. One thing to note, they're all regulars. In Vietnam before the national servicemen were trained and be able to move up there.
So there are 9 battalions, 1 through to 9, and many of them served multiple times on tours in Vietnam.
What's just gone past? This 2 RAR led by Alex Nee. Though second to none is their motto, and their pipe band plays the march is Back in Black from AC/DC.
And I saw Bill Munro down there and Billy Thorpe from 2RAR. And 3rd Battalion was there on parade.
Right, very famous for their battles in Korea, Kapiong, Mariang Sang, and of course they were at Fire Support Base Coral in Vietnam as well. And have done many tours of East Timor, Afghanistan, etc. today.
So 5th Battalion, Royal Australia Regiment, 2 tours.
Yes, led by Alan McNulty, has his 2 sons as banner bearers there. That's Stephen and Brian. Laurie Simpson's marching with them today, known as the Tiger Battalion.
And on parade will be Ken Carter and Laurie Carroll and Ray Ward, no doubt.
And the 6th Battalion, very famous for their Long Tan battle in 1966 in Vietnam, as well as they have a Victoria Cross winner from during Operation Slipper in Afghanistan, Dan Keegren. And he's the only VC recipient for the Royal Australian Regiment, worthy of note.
Second time around for the Australian Army Band at Perth.
It's the 7th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment. That's their nickname, as we've mentioned over the decades, the Pink Battalion. I've got to give them a big oink oink, I think, this year.
Well, that's what I was told they had to do. Don Crudden said to do that. So with Don, you got your wish.
There he is. And importantly, today I'd like to acknowledge John Bell, who's carrying the flag remembrance flag for his late brother and also wearing his late brother's medals. And John's marched every year since the Vietnam War, remembering his brother Alec Bell, who was served in 67-68 and died of wounds in 1968 as a medic. He was a national serviceman. He was 22 years of age. And also Reg Bandy, the RSM of 7 Battalion 2nd Tour, MBE, sadly passed away since last Anzac Day. One of the major members of the Royal Australian Regiment, and well remembered.
And 8 RAR and 9 RAR have just passed by as well. We shouldn't forget to mention them, even though they're out of sight at the moment.
Yep, the Grey 8.
Second time around for the Royal Australian Navy Band. And as we mentioned, very busy at times.
Right, here we have Combined Commando Squadron, 2nd Commando. I mentioned there's only 3 surviving members of 2nd Commando. Keith Hayes here in WA. Big shout out to you, Keith. I know you're as deaf as, and you know, we did see a DCM recipient being worn. 2 other members, Jack Hansen lives in Queensland, Fred Otway in New South Wales. Saw plenty of service on Timor, followed by New Guinea and then New Britain.
I think it was, that would have been a relative Joe Poynton who got a DCM for Timor. And Rod Willock's there in the West Australian Regiment, Royal West Australian Regiment. Marching today, they are members of that, all those different battalions, 1144th, the City of Perth Regiment, 16th Infantry, the Cameron Highlanders, and 28th Battalion Swan Regiment.
And just for people watching at home, a DCM?
Oh, Distinguished Conduct Medal, second only to the Victoria Cross.
Special Air Service Regiment, formed as a company in July 1957 and a regiment on the 4th of September 64. Service in Borneo, Vietnam, followed by Somalia and Cambodia in 1993, and they have been exceedingly busy ever since.
Some of them wear the old red cherry beret from the company days when they first formed in the late 50s, so how far they go back.
And of course 2 Victoria Cross recipients in Afghanistan, that Ben Roberts-Smith VC MG and Mark Donaldson VC.
City of Coburn Pipes Band.
And then we have the training team, the AATTV, first in Vietnam 1962 and came out in 1972 with the motto persevere. And a hello to Ray Hine, who's ill at home today. 4 Victoria Crosses for the training team. Keith Payne, the last surviving VC winner, or recipient I should say. Interesting to note that they had about 30 national servicemen serving the training team, which we always considered them to be the old and bold, but they, towards the end there in the MAC teams, plenty of younger chaps joined.
And one of their commanders was Colonel Lloyd, later a brigadier, who was a West Australian. And I guess Jim Clark, RSM of the Australian Regular Army, would be watching today as well. First Australian Task Force Headquarters Association. These were the ones who were at Nui Dat and looked after things there in command of the task force. 161 Independent Reconnaissance Flight is on parade today. They flew the Pilatus Porters and the small Bell Sioux helicopters. The Australian Intelligence Corps, led by Major Brian Dawson, RFD. They were formed in 1907, so they're one of the oldest corps in the Australian Army. Disbanded in 1914 and then reformed in 1939. And have been going strong ever since. Australian Field Hospital Association, again you can see their banner there. And Brian Hulliston, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Hulliston, RFD, leading the push today. Again, it's this 50th anniversary this year for that particular unit. The field ambulance groups there, 2nd, 7th Field Ambulance. Leslie LeSwift's the famous officer who commanded that one. And sadly, we mentioned the passing of Hal Finkelstein, one of the last members of the unit, aged 99, 2nd, 13th, with their battle honours both in the Middle East and Southwest Pacific.
And the Ordnance Corps Association, the Cockroaches, as they fondly like to call themselves, led by Warren Evans, 22 years service, including Vietnam. This year, only recently, they've just lost Shorty Elder, aged 88 years of age, stretcher bearer from 3RAR in Korea, before seeing the light and becoming a cockroach, serving in Vietnam with the Australian Logistics Support Company in 1965-66.
And Kevin Judge will be down there, and Kevin Graham. Might see Gary Hugo, perhaps.
Yes, unfortunately, Major Robert Campbell couldn't join us this year. He is ill at home. And then we have the Ramey. Now, they fix everything from small items through to guns and tanks, etc. So an integral part of the forces.
Often called the spanners. And these units we're seeing are often called the tail following the teeth being the fighting services and the tail. But without the tail, the teeth can't do their job. So we have the Royal Australian Army Pay Corps Association on parade today, led by Bob Mees. Also the Military Police Association, led by Ashley Dickinson, a captain, and also Sean Colopy. They were formed in 1916 for combat policing roles, which they still do today.
The Women's Royal Australian Army Corps we saw there as well. 67th anniversary of the Corps, as well as the 41st anniversary of the RAC Association. Has around 100 members of the Women's Royal Australian Army Corps.
And we're just seeing here the Officer Training Unit, the OTU Skybell Association. These were national servicemen who were selected for officer training. It's a 22-week intensive course. Of the 2,700 selected, only 1,871 graduated. And there were some of those Skybell officers as platoon commanders at Long Tan and throughout the Vietnam War.
Well, that was actually the Red Cross on the screen at the time, the Australian Red Cross. Proud to be represented at the Anzac Day Parade and carry on the legacy of those members and volunteers who began the organisation in this nation about 100 years ago. Second time around for the WA Police Pipe Band.
In the Napier Tarpon. Royal Australian Air Force Association, led by Clive Robertson. And of course they represent all the Air Force groups as well. We mentioned the Bismarck Sea. The sad passing though this year of Bill Patterson, DFC 39 Squadron RAF. He was a Beaufighter pilot in the Mediterranean. And also Ken Howlett and Warren Craig. So all those units there, we've got number 3 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force Association. They're the fighter planes who were formed as 3 Squadron in 1916 and then were reformed for World War II and saw service in the Mediterranean particularly and the North African campaign and in Italy. Also in 2018, if we jump ahead, they were flying F-38s and are now getting re-equipped to the unit of operational training capacity in 2021. Pathfinder Association on parade today, the very famous group of the pilots. And also 25 Squadron City of Perth, Rough Branch, is on parade amongst the Air Force group. And this year is also the 50th anniversary of the famous Dam Buster raid. RAF, the 617 Squadron, but there was one Western Australian amongst them, Flying Officer Lance Howard, who gained a Distinguished Flying Cross as a observer navigator on that particular raid. So RAF Police as well there amongst them, and the 3rd Telecommunications Unit led by Jack Eagles. So this unit was very famous because once it became operational in 1947, it was on 24 hours a day for the next 44 years. Interesting roster, Clint. You think you've got it bad? That could be quite bad.
I've never complained about a roster again after hearing something like that.
And they were finally disbanded in December 1991.
And here we have the RAF Vietnam Veterans Association, led by Jimmy Muscat, a 2 Squadron chap from Phang Rang, base where the Canberras flew out of in Vietnam, as well as they're representing 35 Squadron Caribous. They were known as the Wallabies. And then 9 Squadron, the helicopter boys. A lot of gun support with 9 Squadron. They supported the chaps on the ground with medical evacuation as well as fire support.
And there's the Women's Royal Australian Air Force there. RAF is there also known, led by June Moore, 20 marching today.
And you see some of the brevets being worn by the Air Force people above their medals, some with wings as pilots, and the other ones with just half wings. They could be air gunners, observers, loadmasters.
Worth mentioning about the Women's Royal Australian Air Force there. Established with 30 officers and 832 airwomen. More than 2,000 women applied to join the RAF by July 1950.
And again, you can see tremendous service within one person's family there with their own service and their relative service indicated by the other medals worn on their right side, as you said earlier in the commentary.
And the Malaya Borneo Veterans Association, led by Bill Adamson. It's be the last time they're marching this year. They've decided that they're all getting a bit elderly, and the group is winding up. But a shout out to Gary Burgoyne, who was at home. On parade we have Don Crosby, who's a career in Malaya, as well as Ernie Lopez, who was a colonel in the Malay Regiment.
There's the Western Australian Wind Symphony, part of the WA Charity Orchestra. 25 members involved today.
And the Vietnam Veterans Association, they're commemorating Five Support Base Coral on the 20th of May this year at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial at Kings Park. And hello to Ross Strickland, who decided to go fishing, apparently.
Well, you get that. I think also with this group, this is quite a mixed group. They represent all corps, all service, Army, Navy, Air Force. In fact, they'll have some Armoured Corps veterans down there. And this year was the 50th anniversary that 1st Armoured Regiment with Centurion tanks were deployed into Vietnam. Honouring Indigenous war graves was led by John Schnauz. He was an Armoured Corps soldier in 1st Armoured Regiment with tanks in Vietnam. So they believe in paying their respects to Indigenous Defence Servicemen and women who served in Australia in times of conflict.
And following them, we've got the Australian Peacekeepers and Peacemakers Veterans Association, led by Mike Ramalis. And the significant event for them this year is the 25th anniversary of the 1RAR group deploying to Somalia.
Also saw the Gulf War Veterans and Peacekeepers Association.
Yeah, it's mainly made up of naval chaps. Our biggest commitment to the Gulf was the RAN.
And we have the Defence Reserves Association WA branch, led by Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cook, AM RFD, retired, a past CO 16 Battalion. The Defence Reserves Association was founded in 1969 as the CMF Association, Citizens Military Forces. It was changed in 1987 to the Army Reserves Association, and then to the Defence Reserves Association today. And they look after all matters affecting the Defence Reserves.
National Servicemen's Association of Australia there too?
Yes, that's right. There's two eras of those, 1951 to 1959, and then again in 1965 to 72. Have our overseas contingents with the New Zealand ex-servicemen and women on parade, led by Lieutenant Commander Ross Crawford. Our important link with the Kiwis.
Nice to see again the emphasis or reinforcing Anzac Day and what it means with the New Zealand ex-servicemen and women marching today.
And the ex-Royal New Zealand Navy group, led by Brett Bramley, former Chief Petty Officer Rider. So they were formed in 1941, the Kiwi Navy. Prior to them, the New Zealand Navy was a division of the Royal Navy from 1921, operating under the auspices of the Naval Defence Act of 1913. British Ex-Services Association. You see a mix of hat badges there, led by John Park. Interesting for them too is the 100th anniversary of the formation of the RAF in 1918. Scottish units represented amongst Rifle Brigade units down there as well. Rich heritage amongst those veterans.
Perth Metro Pipe Band again, sounding magnificent on this Anzac Day morning.
So the British Ex-Services Association these days represent obviously their conflicts earlier on, but particularly now World War II and more so into post-World War II with their end of empire campaigns in the South Arabia and Cyprus, etc. And this in Northern Ireland, of course, the Troubles, the Falklands, the Gulf War, and more recently Iraq and Afghanistan.
And behind the band here we have the Airborne Forces Association of WA. It's led by Eddie Carnegie, the president. He's served with the 9th Independent Para Squadron Royal Engineers in Northern Ireland. Flag bearers are Jeff Moorcroft, who served on the Falklands with 2nd Parachute Regiment. Nick Marshall, 21 SAS in Cyprus. So we can see from the cherry beret very proud wearers of that. Airborne Forces, including service at Arnhem, of course, and right through to a big airdrop in the Suez in 1956, and still significant today. Very hard work in Afghanistan with these chaps. 2 Victoria Crosses awarded to the Parachute Regiment in Afghanistan.
And looks like their RSM is from one of the Royal Irish regiments with his great big green hackle, and I think he's giving orders of command. He's wearing the black gloves. Airborne. And still going. Nothing's going to stop him. It's great to see the veterans at that age virtually live for Anzac Day.
Yes, and his single medal doesn't certainly hides probably the length of service and the hard yards that chap has done.
Parachute Regiment, particularly, as Stephen mentioned earlier, very famous for their D-Day exploits and Arnhem, but also in North Africa, where they became known as the Red Devils by the Germans. And then, of course, the post-war era and service, and especially so in the Falklands of 1982 at Goose Green, and gained 2 Victoria Crosses there, and continued to serve well in Afghanistan, gaining, I think, about 3 Victoria Crosses in Afghanistan to the Paras. So, North Americans.
As the banner suggests.
Yes, a big group expat contingents these days. The North American units here, they represent all the services, of course, that are resident in Western Australia, and it represents members from World War II, Korea, and also those serving in Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan. They're led by Commander Chris Butler, US Navy retired. Of course, their service is incredibly extensive in their own conflicts from the 19th century right through, but then they got involved with Australia on the 4th of July at the Battle of Hamel. That's why General Monash had the battle planned on the 4th of July, because of the first time Americans were working with the Australians, learning what it was like on the Western Front, and fought successfully at the Battle of Hamel for the first time. So there'll be various units represented in that. You have the US Marine Corps as well. Our Vietnam veterans amongst them, some of World War II. And behind them too is the veterans of foreign wars, so they have quite a mix as well, led by Post Commander James Morn. Now, these veterans of foreign wars are like our RSL sub-branches, and so these particular ones here are sub-branch 12163, or they call them a post. Staff Sergeant, Commander James Moore was a Staff Sergeant in the US Marine Corps. And you see their Legion type of caps they wear. They're not their service caps, that's part of their return services, and they wear different badges and insignia on those to indicate that as well.
Australian Returned and Servicemen's League there, and before that the descendants of the World War II Chinese Defence Force. First time marching in Perth for them. Again, marching in Sydney in 2015 and Melbourne in 2016, and now here in Perth.
I think we'll see a bit...
Indian Armed Forces Association.
We'll see a bit more of those in more marches, Clint. And we'll find out much more about their history in due course. And the Greek contingents, of course, always been a big part of the parade. Socrates Pakamas wearing the Greek national costume. Indian Armed Forces on parade today. Jag Saklani, who was also a decorated fighter pilot in the Indo-Pakistani Wars of 65 to 71, is on parade today. He was awarded the Aver Chakra, which is India's 3rd highest gallantry award during the 1971 war.
And we see the Greek Ex-Servicemen's Association behind them. An uneasy peace since the ceasefire on the 26th of July 53, and it was the first UN action after World War II, and quite significant.
And the Korean ex-service group as well on parade today.
And the Polish ex-service and families veterans, led by Vladislav Kazmarek and various other members there. They are extremely proud of their participation in fighting beside the Allies during World War II. Significant contribution to the RAF with fighter pilots in the Battle of Britain.
And there was also a contingent that fought with the Australians at Tobruk.
And the Rhodesian Services Association, led by Harry Harvey, was colonel in the Rhodesian SAS in C Squadron 1958 to 82. Seen significant service from Mashonaland 1890 through to Rhodesia becoming Zimbabwe in 1979, and an array of medals and decorations down there for them. South Africans, significant this year. Airborne veterans are leading the march to commemorate 40 years since Operation Reindeer. It was the largest parachute deployment in modern military history since Operation Market Garden over Arnhem. One battle of note was the Battle of Lombard in 1987, where their small armoured vehicles took on T-55 tanks from the Angolan forces and won the day.
The bright colours of the WA Sikh Band. The WA Sikh Band, the nation's first and only Sikh marching band.
And they're, of course, commemorating amongst the Indian community, the Sikh community as well, all their battle honours from Afghanistan and China, Gallipoli, Egypt, France, and Flanders. They were in Mesopotamia. They served on the northwest frontier of India. And in World War II, they were in Burma, Malaya, Iraq, North Africa, Italy, and Greece. And Sikhs are neither Hindu or Muslim. And the Sikhs being the martial race of India.
And we see the Vietnamese Ex-Servicemen's Association. Vietnam's been a total conflict, well, was from World War II through to 1975. Occupied by the Japanese in World War II, the French Indochina War from 1946 to 54, and then what was termed the Second Vietnamese War, 55 to 75. About 2.5 million casualties suffered by the Vietnamese. Many escaped and came to Australia as refugees in the 70s and integrated into Australian society exceedingly well.
A highly decorated chap at the front wearing his Vietnam-era fatigues with a number of crosses of gallantry as well, and Special Forces insignia. So, of course, make a big part of our ethnic community in Western Australia these days.
Just a reminder, of course, at 11 o'clock we'll be taking you to the entire commemorative service program, which will feature again the Salvation Army Perth Fortress Band. There'll be an 80-strong choir provided by Perth Modern there as well. Always worth watching and paying attention to here on ABC Television. Then after that, we'll continue on with our Anzac Day commemorative broadcast. We'll take you to Gallipoli for the dawn service, and at 1, Villa Bretonneau, the centenary commemoration taking place in France. Scouts Association there as well, the WA branch, led by Mark Thorpe, the branch commissioner. The Scout movement been in operation for over 110 years, established in most nations around the world. Membership of 40 million across the world. There's a number of them there, alongside with the Girl Guides of WA. Membership of over 10 million girls and women in 145 countries.
And of course, the
largest all-female organisation in the world.
Scouts and Guides took a prominent part in looking after the memorials today and overnight, and supporting the Returned Services Group in Western Australia, various activities throughout this Anzac Day.
So Wayne and Steve, the march having passed the dais and all the officials, the parade wrapping up very shortly down at Langley Park. The commemorative service will begin in the Perth Concert Hall for the first time very soon. A new venue, and hopefully a comfortable one for some of the more elderly veterans who did march today. Repeating, coming up on ABC Television, the dawn service from Gallipoli, and then we'll move on to France, the fields of France, and the memorial at Villas Bretonneau. As always, a special presentation later tonight on ABC News, wrapping up everything that's happened today, starting here in Perth and also around the nation and around the world. Some of the scenes from the dawn service at Kings Park this morning to the city skyline here in Perth after the Anzac Day march. Anzac Day these past few years has had a strong emphasis on Gallipoli and the Western Front, and with good reason. There have been many 100-year anniversaries to commemorate. But we should also never forget that before the Great War there was another overseas conflict, and one that also involved West Australians.
In November 1899, young West Australians went to war. It was before Federation. For the colony of Western Australia, this was the first and only time such action would be taken. The battleground was South Africa. The enemy were the Boers.
At the time, people like John Forrest said, well, we are a backyard of the British Empire, and so if the mother country is in trouble, we will go automatically to support them.
As it happened, the Western Australian mounted infantry who left for the Cape were wearing police uniforms. Historian Bill Edgar explains.
They dressed in it when they took ship to South Africa. When they actually then went into action, by that time they'd got khakis from the British Army, but only one set of khakis, which they had to use for months before they got a second set. So you can imagine what they looked like after months on the belt.
While the colonies were yet to become a nation, the Boers would certainly know they were fighting a people called Australians.
They didn't have it all their own way because the Boers were very, very active down into the Cape Colony, where they'd come down from the Orange Free State and the Republic of the Transvaal, and they were very, very experienced and competent in the bush on the veldt.
The West Australians joined a British column heading north to relieve Ladysmith. What happened along the way is history that should be better known.
The British column, including the West Australians, set up a camp at a place called Slingers Fontaine. They had the feeling that the Boers were moving around the back of them and threatening them, so the situation was quite parlous.
The British-Australian force, numbering about 130, was facing 400 Boers. The West Australians, led by Hatherley Moore, a British major, occupied a small hill or kopje. Their role was to block the Boer advance. On February the 9th, this is what happened.
It was a hot summer's day, sun came down, water ran low, but there was no escape. They couldn't get out, so they just continued the defence. The Boer commander called on the Australians to surrender. You're in a hopeless situation, and you give up and we'll treat you well. And Moore purportedly called back, "I'm in command of a group of Australians. If I surrender, they'll shoot me." But what we can affirm is that when the Boers called on the surrender, the Australians all fixed bayonets and showed them above the parapets and then let fly with all this fruity Australian language, which kept the Boers from making the final rush. About 9 o'clock, Sergeant Hensman, who was out on one of the flanks protecting the horses, partially got up just to see where the Boers were, and he was shot twice and very badly wounded, and he was quite exposed and in a lot of trouble. So two troopers, Alex Krieger and Mick Conway, crawled over to him to help him. Krieger managed to bound up his wounds, but Conway was shot and killed at that point straight away. So Krieger built a bit of a defensive barricade around Hensman, badly wounded, and tore off some bushes and laid over the top of him to keep the sun from him. And at that point the Boers started to rush them, and Krieger picked up a rifle and shot 3 of them, and that kept them at bay. So Hensman was left, and Krieger had to crawl back to his original position because they had to keep the Boers from getting to the horses on that particular flank. That night, Alex Krieger, who was also slightly wounded, the man who'd attended to Hensman, he volunteered to go back to the hill with the unit doctor to try and retrieve Conway's body and probably Hensman as well. So in the middle of the night, they went back with a cart. They picked up Conway's body, and Hensman was still alive, in great pain and in distress, but they brought him back too. Krieger, Alex Krieger, was recommended for the Victoria Cross. And it was Hensman who had put him on a charge of misconduct the previous day. Dumb insolence, actually, was the description. And then the following day, of course, it was Krieger that rescued him. The Victoria Cross was never awarded to Krieger, probably because he was a bit of a rough diamond, out of the bush, Ballarat goldfields and all that sort of thing.
After hanging on all day, Moore decided to make a night run for Slingers Fontaine. This was achieved. The next morning, the British commander posted his appreciation. And there was more. The General decreed that the kopje where the holding action had taken place should henceforth be known as West Australia Hill.
We tend to look to the eastern colonies for our history, But West Australia has a unique history in itself, and I think this particular action is one way of pronouncing that and making and highlighting it too for the benefit of Western Australians.
You're watching the Anzac Day March and Commemorative Service on ABC Television. Clint Wilden with you. Great you could join us. We're joined by a very special guest, someone who I'd love to talk to about his time as one of the state's most popular governors, and I also know he's a big cricket fan, so I'd be happy to talk to him about that. But on today of all days, appropriate to speak to the former governor, Dr. Ken Michael, about his time with Legacy. It's a personal story for you, Dr. Michael. Tell us about it.
Thanks very much, Clint, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Well, I'm a son of Greek migrants, and my dad came out as a young boy and became a British subject and eventually volunteered for the Australian Imperial Forces and went to the Western Front in the First World War and served there for a couple of years and was gassed and he was disabled during that time, and in 1919 he was discharged and came back, led a normal life, and we have a couple of families and quite a few kids. And when I was 8, he unfortunately passed away, and I became a Legacy ward as a result.
So someone like yourself can vouch for how important Legacy is. What did they do for you?
Well, Legacy gave us that family focus. I know I had a strong family, but they gave us that family focus. They gave us the time, and they were caring. And they recognised and never forgot you during the time from that 8 years old right through till I became certainly a university graduate, and that was thanks to the Repatriation Department, or Veterans Affairs as it's now known. So between the two, Legacy and, as we know, the Repatriation Department, I was given an opportunity. I was given an opportunity to have an education, and I was able to go to university, complete an engineering degree and take it from there. And that would not have happened if I did not have the capabilities that were offered to me by both Legacy and the Repatriation Department. And Legacy, I always felt, and they never lost their contact throughout the time, and that we heard from our guardian or legatee each year, Christmas time especially, and they'd come and see us, visit us. They'd invite us to events during the course of the year. My mother, a young widow, would take me to the various events with my brother and sister, who were also Legacy wards. And so we were part of the family, I guess. And I always felt, and I've never forgotten, and I will always say, that Legacy gave me hope. Hope that there was a future, and hope that there was a caring community right here before us. And that caring community remains to this day. And I might add that this year is the 90th anniversary of Perth Legacy, and next year will be Fremantle's Legacy's anniversary, and they'll be celebrating it in June. And so I'm delighted with that, because I think we really need to take a step back and just look at all the wonderful things that have been done, the people who've been served, and the opportunities that have been created by the very people that make Legacy work, and knowing that the government was there behind us through repatriation, so that we were able to, in good times and bad, be cared for and to be given opportunities. So I'm indebted to a country like Australia, I'm indebted to organisations like Legacy, and I'm indebted to the fact that the community is caring to the extent that we were given those opportunities.
So you lose your father at the age of 8. And then I believe you spent some time at the Busselton camp, which is well known for people that have had involvement with Legacy. Yeah. Tell us your experiences there.
Well, I certainly, we never really had the opportunity to go, and it was offered to us, but my mother, obviously had concerns, so we probably didn't get there as often as we would have liked. But no, I don't have, I must admit, I get to go down south every now and then, and I visit, or not visit, but I sort of watch over that particular development. And I think providing a place where families can go and not only enjoy themselves but reflect and have time for themselves is a real credit to Legacy in providing that facility.
And one last one for us, Dr. Michael. We appreciate your time today on the coverage, but still a very relevant organisation today, Legacy?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it's gone further than in my day. In my day, it was very much about providing that family atmosphere, that family support, that encouragement, never forgetting you, and always having someone there that cared. And they've extended that to the extent that they now allow support financially, scholarships, and as best they can, and also look after the family as a whole to ensure that they can get the education very much along the lines that we had. So they're a great organisation. I fully support them, and as I say, they're an organisation to whom I feel very indebted. Thank you.
Dr. Ken Michael, thank you very much for talking to us about Legacy.
My pleasure, Clinton. Thank you.
So Dr. Ken Michael there. Now, of course, we know that wars have songs or pieces of music that instantly bring memories back to people. Think of the White Cliffs of Dover, A Long Way to Tipperary, or Pack Up Your Troubles, for example. While they're individual tracks we might remember, the Vietnam War has an entire soundtrack. Now, we've used some of that music, both local and American, in our next story. You'll know the songs, but what do you know about the Battle of Long Tan?
Left my heart to the sappers round K-Sand, and I sold my soul with my cigarettes to the black market man. I've had the Vietnam cold turkey, from the ocean to the Silver City, and it's only I the vets could understand.
In a country full of place names with just 2 syllables, Da Nang, Nui Dat, Vung Tau, Hanoi, Long Tan in the rubber plantation could be just another. Except that Long Tan is the most recognised Australian battle of the Vietnam War. This is why. "5,000 kilometres south of Vietnam, the environment couldn't be more different. No rubber trees for starters, and no gunfire or shell bursts. This is the landscape of Peter Aspinall's retirement. Probably not much change from 1966, when he was part of Australia's increasing involvement in Indochina.
My views were back then in 1965, 66, I'm going off to do what I was professionally trained to do.
There's something happening here.
In Vietnam, the Australians had only recently set up their base at Nui Dat.
There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware.
There was a lot of probing by the Viet Cong of the defences we had, and that obviously gave the Viet Cong and their North Vietnamese army advisors a sense that the Australians could be attacked fairly early in the peace in a major way and hopefully inflict a very significant casualty on us, and presumably influence, the extent to which we would stay there.
Patrols were sent to find the enemy positions. One of them, D Company, was surrounded in an abandoned village. This was Long Tan. 109 diggers, maybe 2,000 Viet Cong, hundreds of rubber trees, and it was bucketing.
Riders on the storm. Riders on the storm.
Visibility was down to literally 1 metre or 2 metres or 3 metres. So it was very difficult in that sense, getting bearings and understanding who's doing what.
The Australians were under heavy fire. The situation was beyond serious. D Company called for help from Nui Dat. When it came, Peter Aspinall was part of the rescue.
Nowhere to run to, baby. Nowhere to hide. Got nowhere to run.
We were given orders to mount the APCs, armoured personnel carriers, and then progress into the Long Tan Rubber to relieve and to rescue them. Mind you, there were other things that protected D Company and were very, very much instrumental in them surviving long enough for us to get there.
The first protection came from the batteries at Nui Dat, with targets identified by forward observers embedded with D Company.
So there was this ring of fire around D Company, which, whilst it is extremely heavy and caused enormous casualties, was not sufficient in itself to become impregnable to the Viet Cong.
The second was the daring of the Australian chopper pilots.
The two helicopter crews, Royal Australian Air Force helicopter crews, who in that blinding rain flew those helicopters at treetop level. And I might add they had all of their navigation lights on, their spotlight at the front, in order to know where they were getting to for D Company.
Flying at treetop height, they dropped boxes of ammunition to the diggers, whose supply was low. Meanwhile, the rescuers were themselves encountering Viet Cong.
At one stage, we actually stopped our APCs. One of the platoons of Alpha Company actually dismounted. I understand from a mistaken belief that we were actually in the location. The company commander indicated no, that was not the case, get back on. And they did so without any casualties at all, because they were actually mingling with the Viet Cong at the time. We continued, and as we got closer to where we thought D Company was, we actually drove across the top of what we believe was the final assault wave of the Viet Cong just before they would have walked over the top of D Company. So we literally arrived in the nick of time.
In the nick of time, like the cavalry in the movies. By 7 that evening, the Battle of Long Tan was over. 18 Australians were killed and 24 wounded. The Viet Cong said 500 Australians died and the battle was theirs. History is remembered differently.
And after all, we're only ordinary men.
Coming later today on ABC television, at midday we'll take you to the dawn service from Gallipoli, and then at 1 we'll head to the centenary commemoration in France at Villers-Bretonneux. And coming up very shortly here on ABC television, the commemorative service from the Perth Concert Hall. One of the terrible facts of war is the breakage it leaves behind, be it political systems, cities or families. Despite the best of intentions, things can never be as they once were, but you can try. The broken bodies of soldiers, for instance.
no longer hiding away, but now occupying centre stage at the Invictus Games. Meet Peter Rudland, one of the incredible Invictus athletes.
I have a lot of pain as part of every day. After a while, I realised, regardless of if I train or not, I'm going to have pain. So I may as well train and feel better for it. My name is Peter Rudland. I'm a sergeant in the Army. I was wounded on a tour of Afghanistan in 2010.
At 3:30 a.m, on the way to the front line and deep in Taliban territory, trouble struck mid-air.
With the crash, I don't remember a lot. We lost 4 guys, 3 Australian soldiers and 1 American. I woke up and I was looking at my legs. I probably wouldn't walk again. My injuries pretty much cover most of my body. Leg injuries, knee injuries, where the rifle went through my leg. I broke my pelvis, rib injuries, spinal, lots and lots of spinal. You go from negative to positive all the time, 100 times a day.
See you, bub. Have a good day.
Love you.
Me too.
Love you.
Love you, bub. Okay. Guess what time it is? It's brekkie. Do you want to climb up, please? Are you ready for breakfast?
One of the things about recovery is most guys really struggle to find their identity again.
Please eat your breakfast.
No.
Eat it.
Yeah, after being in the Army for 28 years, it was a difficult transition to go in being a stay-home dad.
I'm not upset.
That's a pretty good display of a child that is upset.
I go to work full-time as a police officer here in town. Now he has to worry about the washing and the feeding and dinner and all that sort of thing.
Hey, not all over your face.
Just gets out there and he does stuff. Pete completed a couple of diplomas in counselling. He's seen so many people go through PTSD and what it can do to their families.
Hey, James, I heard you coming up the hill.
I started to counsel mainly veterans with PTSD, depression, anxiety.
Mate, sit down, make yourself comfortable. Cheers.
For a lot of people, you can see their injuries, but there are a lot of people you cannot see their injuries, they're hidden.
Isolation is a factor.
There's plenty of opportunities to tap into with meeting people.
So, if it's a mental injury, or just purely having your occupation taken away from you, to identify yourself again becomes the biggest issue. Things like Invictus Games provide a platform for you to identify yourself again, for you to grow again.
The Invictus Games has brought a lot to Pete's life. If you were to look at him or walk next to him down the street, you wouldn't even think twice that he's been in a helicopter crash.
Nobody expects you to be the greatest athlete in the world. It's about beginnings, small beginnings with a large outcome. Engaging in sport gets that attitude back in you, the will to succeed, the will to win. Training around here can be bloody dangerous.
I do get worried about him riding. The trike is so low to the ground and we're on country roads where grain trucks and all sorts of things goes past. I always get concerned with Pete's training. He suffers. He can be on the lounge for the next two days after that, and he's always saying to me, oh, my knees or my back. I have to try and be sympathetic, but I'm like, well, you just went for a 30 or 50 kilometre ride. At the same time, it's good for his mental state to be out there and competing and training, so I just have to remember the benefits of both.
Holistically, the Invictus Games gives us so much to go after.
Last year he went to the Invictus Games in Florida.
Going to Orlando was an amazing experience. With this Invictus Games coming up, I have a completely different attitude than the last one. The last one I was there to learn. This time I'm there to win. My hopes out of the whole Invictus thing is to empower other people. There's plenty of guys out there and girls who have been injured either, in war, in training, who are sitting there looking at the walls inside a hospital thinking, where do I go from here?
Cross. Ready?
Ooh,
1,
big
2,
jump.
3, jump.
Nice,
Nice
work. Those of us who have been there know that there is a good future.
Across there, remember?
We've managed to not just get on with our lives, but to actually improve it.
Thank you.
My life is 10 times better now than it was beforehand.
Yeah, Elkie.
Really slowly.
Mummy wants you to give her.
I am a better man, I have a great family, and I'm involved with something awesome like Invictus.
And it truly is awesome as well. And you'll see the Invictus Games on ABC television a little later this year. So people have gathered in the Perth Concert Hall for the commemorative service. Let's go there now and join our MC from ABC Radio, Jeff Hutchinson.
Ladies and gentlemen,